All right, just so that you guys know what we got, again, this is day 2 of section 3.1. And just so that you guys know what we're doing for this one is, yesterday or Thursday, you had solved these by graphing and you solved them by taking square rooting. Now, I'm going to show you a third way today. And what it is it's using what they call the zero product property. It sounds complicated, but it's not. Okay? The zero product property is also known as factoring. Okay? So the zero product property equals factoring. Okay? So that's what you're going to be doing for these, is you're going to solve by, and it even says solve by factoring. It doesn't even say use the zero product property to solve the equation. It goes on to say solve by factoring. Bless you. Okay? So here's what you're going to have to do for problems like this. It's going to say x squared plus 12x plus 35 equals 0. And when you want to solve by factoring, the first thing that needs to happen is you need to set the equation equal to 0. If it is already equal to 0, you can bypass step 1. But if it's not equal to 0, you need to make it equal to 0. Is this one equal to 0? Yes. Step 2, factor. Now, this is why we did that page 91, is to get you guys practicing some factoring skills. Again, always ask yourself, what can you take out to begin with? Nothing. Because they don't all three share something in common. So there's nothing you can take out immediately. Then what you would do is set up your 2 sets of parentheses. Why 2? Because it's a quadratic. It's squared. So, what times what gives you x squared? X and x. What times what gives you 35, but adds up to be 12? Plus 5 plus 7. Okay, now, is Edie right? Yeah, because 5 times 7 is 35, but when I add those two numbers, I get 12. Very good. Once you have factored it, step 3 is set each group equal to 0 and solve. X plus 5 equals 0. X plus 7 equals 0. How do I solve the first one? Subtract 5. So when I do that, what is 0 minus 5? Negative 5. And subtract 7. What's 0 minus 7? And done. Okay? So when it says to solve by graphing, or solve by factoring, this is my steps I'm going to take. Okay? And the nice thing about this is that the ones that they're going to give you should factor. If they don't factor, then we got to do something else, which we haven't learned yet, and we won't until a few days. Okay. Going through the process, first and foremost, is it equal to 0? No. So what do I have to do?
Add a negative 45.
Subtract 45 to both sides? Or adding a negative 45, I think is what Angie said. So x squared minus 4x minus 45 equals 0. At least for today. That's all.
Okay.
Okay? All right. Now, is there anything I can take out of all 3 groups? Or all 3 numbers? No. What times what gives me x squared? X squared is x and x. What times what gives me negative 45, but adds up to be negative 4? Five and 9 were 2 numbers that multiply together to give me 45. Can I somehow make them be equal to a -4 if I add them?
Negative 9.
-9 plus 5, good job. Now if I set each of those equal to 0, I get x equals -5, and x equals 9er. What'd you guys think? Now, here's another thing that I don't necessarily talk a whole lot to you guys about because you guys have factored forever. But you could check these if you wanted to. And in order to check them, all you do is you put -5 back in for x, put 9 back in for x, and see if they equal 45. If they do, great, you did it right. If they don't, you screwed up. Okay? So on that, a lot of times what people do, especially on numbers like 24 and 48, when you're factoring them, you automatically just assume it's 4 times 6 for 24, when it could be something else. Okay? One more not so easy. Is it equal to 0? No. Make it. So 3x squared minus 5x subtract 2 equals 0. Now what? Can I take anything out of all 3 terms? No. So now I have to set up my 2 sets of parentheses. Now when you have a number in the front, don't forget that aids in it. When you say what times what gives me -2 but adds up to be -5, that ain't going to happen. But the 3 is going to be there as a helper. Because when you have 3x squared, you should have a 3x and an x. Now what times what gives me 2? 1 and 2. Does it matter what order you put them in? Yes, it does. If you put the 2 first and the 1 second, you will not be right. Okay? So the 2 needs to come here and the 1 needs to go there. Here's why. When you refoil it, this would be 6 and this would be a 1. I can use that to make a 5. If you went the other way, you would have had, and what I mean by that is that this is going to have to be negative. If you would have went the other way with it, you would have got a -1 or a +1, and that ain't going to work. That doesn't make the middle. So you need to be very, very careful. Take the time to check to see if the O and the I part makes the middle. If it does, great job. If it doesn't, try a different combination. Don't just throw the numbers in and go, oh, I got it, because chances are you could be wrong. All right? So now what do I do after I get those? Set each group equal to 0. So 3x plus 1 equals 0 and x minus 2 equals 0. How do I solve for x on the first one? Subtract 1, divide by 3. So I get -3, right? -1/3, good. And a lot of people tell me that that's -3 there rather than -1/3. So be very, very careful. What do I get on the second one? 2. X equals 2. What do you guys think? Half of your assignment's doing that. The other half is going to give you directions like this. It's going to say find the zeros of the quadratic function. A 0 is nothing more than where does it cross the x-axis. So when you get to finding the zeros, you've got 3 different options. You can either do graphing, you can do square rooting, or now you can do factoring. It does not matter which one you use. It's your choice. So when they give you problems that look like this, where it says f of x equals 2x squared minus 11x plus 12. And the directions are going to say find the zeros. A 0 again is nothing more than where does it cross the x-axis. So you now have 3 different ways of doing it. You can graph it, you can do the square roots, or you can factor it. Now, looking at the problem itself, Which one of those three is not an option for this problem? Your options again are graphing, square rooting, or factoring. Which one of those three is not an option for this one? Square rooting is not an option. Why is square rooting not an option? No, not so much that they equal to 0. They're not. It's not because they're all prime. Because there's more than one x. You don't just have x squared in there like you did on the other ones that you did for me today. Okay? If there was just an x squared in the problem, like x squared and just a bunch of numbers, then we could do square root still. But this particular thing either has to be graphed or it has to be factored. When you graph it, f of x is the same as y equals. So remember when we did that on Thursday when you put it in your graphing calculator and found the answer? You could do it that way if you want. So, which way do you want to do it? Do you want to factor it or graph it? Factor it, I heard first. So, what times what gives me 2x squared? It's got to be 2x and x. What times what gives you 12? I'll give you this hint about factoring. Remember, if the back sign's positive, then the same sign. So they're both supposed to be negative. What times what gives me 12? What? 1 and 12. 6 and 2. What else? 3 and 4. The order does matter. Which group do you want to try? 1 and 12. 2 times negative 12 is negative 24. Negative 1 makes negative 25. That does not make the middle. Womp, womp, womp. Try again. In that order? So the 4 first and then the 3? Okay. If I go 4 first, then the 3. Here's something that I want to make sure that you are aware of. Do you see that inside your parentheses right now, you put a 2x minus 4? Right? If that's the case, then you should have been able to take a 2 out to begin with. Because I could take a 2 out of both of those two terms. Can I take a 2 out to begin with in the original problem? No. So that combination automatically, I'm not even going to try it. I know isn't going to work. In that order. Try switching the order. Does it work now? If you put a 4 there and a 3 there? Negative 8 minus 3 makes negative 11. Woohoo, we found it. Do not give up. Sometimes it might take you more than one try. This is why you write in pencil so that you can erase it. Okay? So you might not get it on the first try. You might not be as good a factor as the next person. And that's okay. You just got to keep trying. Eventually you'll get it. So then, 2x minus 3 equals 0. X minus 4 equals 0. How do I solve the first one? Add 3 and then what? Divide by 2. So the first one's 3 halves. What do I get for the second one? Add 4. X equals 4. What do you guys think? The first ones are automatically going to say solve by factoring. Then when it says find the zeros, you have the option. It's your choice.
Will the factoring work for all of them? Or will we have to do other forms?
You might have to do other forms. Because if it's just got squared and there isn't another x in there, Savannah, you probably don't want to try to factor it. Although it might. But remember those ones that were non-real answers? Those are not going to factor. So if you try everything and it doesn't factor, then throw it in the calculator and see what it looks like. If it doesn't cross the x-axis, then it doesn't have any. Okay? What do you think, Ash?
I'm just tired.
I'm sorry. So on page 100, to 101, where 27 to 57 multiples of 3.